So much for having me today. I'm Saskia Konynenburg. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, known as NCVO. We are the membership body for charities, voluntary organisations and community groups in England. We have over 17,000 members. And every day those organisations build strong communities and local economies, deliver vital and innovative and trusted services. NCVO is focused on creating the right conditions for these organisations to flourish, really from the actual, bread and butter you need to build capacity in your organisations through ensuring high quality training on fundraising, safeguarding or impact reporting, to name a few, to much more in-depth things like governance reviews or strategy development to ensure your board and systems are working really effectively. But we do much more than just provide services. We work day in and day out to influence decision makers so we can get all we can do with helping organisations and charities to do that life-changing work. And why is this important? I was thinking about this a lot, and I think the word charity conjures up thoughts of organisations run on handouts. We think of, chuggers on the streets asking for donations, and there's a lot of assumptions about charities taking money and not giving. But charities are a major UK economic force that's really under-recognised. Charities contribute roughly 18 billion annually and employ around 3% of our workforce, which far exceeds the top 5 supermarkets combined. With over 170,000 registered entities, we spend nearly 96 billion annually supporting social services, local jobs, community resilience, particularly in areas that the state cannot reach. And in procurement, which obviously we're talking about today, collectively, voluntary organisations deliver nearly £14.3 billion worth of public services each year. And I'm sorry if you might have heard some of this already today, but I think it's really important that we recognise our worth within that. And that when we talk about procurement, we're talking about one of the key systems that determines whether the voluntary sector can fully contribute its leadership and its expertise to solving complex social challenges. Today, I want to talk about the importance of the VCSE sector in procurement and why getting this right really matters, not just for us, but the communities that we all serve. Charities deliver social impact using government funding in a number of ways. Firstly, many are directly involved in delivering public services. They might lead. It might be the lead provider in a contract. I've just seen quite a lot of chat in the chat there about lead providers or primes and subcontractors. So they might also be a subcontractor with us in a supply chain, or they might be in a model of an alliance or a consortium and deliver services together. For example, the voluntary sector delivers a large proportion of services addressing homelessness or violence against women and girls. Secondly, charities are often involved as social value partners. I did quite a lot of work last year with Serco, for example, around where charity sector can be social value partners, and also obviously talking to them about how they can work better with charities. So working alongside private sector contractors delivering major projects. In those situations, charities can help ensure that investment in infrastructure also benefits local communities. Both roles are really important, but obviously they both come with their own challenges. To understand those challenges, I think it's really helpful to clarify something that's often misunderstood, and that's the difference between commissioning and procurement. So commissioning being the whole cycle of how public bodies deliver services with partners. So it starts with understanding needs, designing services, identifying the funding models, selecting providers, and then evaluating outcomes. Procurement, on the other hand, is just one part of that cycle. So it's the formal process to select the providers in line with procurement regulations. But too often what happens is that in practice, we focus on that process bit rather than the purpose. So I really always strongly advise that we start with the first question: what are we trying to achieve? And prior to me working at NCVO, I worked in a local authority. I worked at Bristol City Council, and we very often were trying to work better with charities and looking at what are the actual real challenges in different parts of the city that we need to solve and how will we best solve them. So starting with that question of what are we trying to achieve, and then designing the approach that best achieves that purpose. The services charities deliver are rarely simple or linear. They often support support people facing multiple complex challenges, shaped by poverty, trauma, inequality, health issues, housing instability, criminal records, many other factors. Addressing that complexity requires collaboration, learning, flexibility, and personalisation. Yet often we see procurement processes that are designed in ways that do the opposite. They focus on just one thing and just one outcome. So they can often force organisations that would naturally collaborate to give a personalised, systems approach to helping people, but instead it makes organisations compete against each other. It can also create barriers that exclude smaller organisations with deep community roots and knowledge. And we do see that, we have, many of our members have spoken to that, big, large charities win a contract, come in, look at an issue, attempt to solve it, and then go, and that leaves smaller organisations who really, are very best placed often to know how to solve some of that, shut out. And I think there's a real fear of legal challenge, and that can push authorities towards that highly competitive procurement route, even when other options such as grant funding or collaborative models might achieve better outcomes. So in other words, we currently have a system designed primarily to minimise risk rather than to maximise impact. And all of this is happening in a really difficult context, which many of you will be aware of. Public spending is under huge pressure. Local government is undergoing significant reorganisation, and we're seeing major structural changes across the public sector, including the abolition of NHS England. So in many places, these pressures mean reduced budgets, delays to commissioning decisions, and that greater uncertainty for providers. And at the same time, charities are already operating under significant financial strain. So for charities, we talk at NCVO about the triple threat. So, as public sector services withdraw from providing that non-statutory service, the demand for charity support grows. So that's number one, demand is up. At the same time, there's less funding. So that's number two, less funding around. And compounding this is the rising in costs. So that's the third issue. Charities don't get as many subsidies as a lot of the public assume. They must run like businesses do. So for many years, we've known that charities have been subsidising public service contracts using unrestricted funds to cover that shortfall between contract value and the real cost of delivery. So it's almost, I describe it as like a double tax on the public. So, I'm a taxpayer, I pay my tax, and that goes towards the delivery of public services. At the same time, I may donate to a charity. That charity has to use the fundraise money to cover gaps in the cost of delivering public sector contracts. So our members have told us they are delivering contracts for the same price that was commissioned a decade ago, with no contract uplifts in line with inflation. There's some recent research which I really recommend looking at from Durham University. It's called Third Sector Trends, and that report highlighted a growing reluctance among charities to participate in public service delivery because of these pressures. It's really too financially risky. There's also a long-standing issue with short-term contracting and constant retendering. So three-year contracts, sometimes even shorter. It just makes it really difficult for organisations to invest in improving services, to developing their staff teams, or innovating for better outcomes. Many of our members are waiting right until the final hour, or even worse, weeks after a contract is technically ended, to find out if it will be recommissioned. And if it's not, they have to then make an emergency decision, whether that's redundancy, whether it's completely closing a service. And in some instances, it might actually be the final nail in the coffin for an organisation, and they need to close completely. And what does that mean? When those charities withdraw from delivering public services, communities really lose a lifeline. They lose valuable expertise and the support they really need and trust. Charities delivering underfunded frontline services such as employability programs or women's refuges are sometimes asked to demonstrate what additional social value they will bring to a contract. And this is a real bugbear for me. They can feel, it just feels really disconnected from reality, because the work itself is the social value, and the indicators used in frameworks don't always capture the kinds of impact charities bring. So building trust in communities, mobilising volunteers, co-producing services with local people, and reinvesting surpluses back into that additional support. So if social value is going to work for communities, it needs to really recognise the distinctive strengths of the VCSE sector. Now, aware that all sounded like a lot of doom and gloom and a bit moany, but the good news is that we do have some good examples of approaches that work better. So one is the Plymouth Alliance. So rather than commissioning a series of siloed services, the local authority commissioned an adaptive system. So they brought together an alliance of small charities and awarded them a 10-year contract. The budget was devolved to the alliance itself, and the local authority became a partner within the alliance rather than simply a funder. And this approach allowed organisations to design services flexibly around people's needs, learn from experience and adapt it over time. It's an example of what is sometimes described as human learning systems, where services are designed to respond to complexity rather than impose rigid structures. And it shows that procurement can support collaboration and innovation if we design it in that way. At NCVO, we've got a long track record of working to improve how public services are commissioned and delivered. So historically, we've brought together commissioners and VCSE organisations, we've hosted roundtables. We really try to help each other learn and break down those barriers. We've worked to implement procurement regulations and guidance, and during the pandemic, we successfully pushed for greater flexibility in contracts so charities could adapt their services quickly. We've worked with the Local Government Association, particularly around the Procurement Act in 2023, to develop guidance on collaborative commissioning. So we co-produce some guidance which is available online, and it's about making processes more accessible, collaborative and socially focused. And we also push for commitments within the Civil Society Covenant to support longer term and more collaborative funding. So for those that don't know, the Covenant is an agreement between government and charities about how we will work together. And the Covenant Council sits within number 10, and it's chaired by NCVO's CEO, Kate Lee. But NCVO is just one organisation. We are quite small, but our reach is mighty, and we have real legitimacy within government. But we can only do this because of the collective voice with our members. So just a little plug incoming. If you are a voluntary organisation, a charity, social enterprise, etc., and not yet a member of NCVO, I'd really encourage you to consider joining us. To recognise this event today, we are offering new members a special discount of 30% off the price of a year's membership. And I've shared the information on how to access that with the team, who will then share that for everyone who attended the summit. I think the reason I'm saying that is procurement reforms present a real opportunity, but they'll only succeed if they are implemented in ways that genuinely open doors for the sector. So we need the strongest voice to be able to push for that, and that requires the broadest range of member input, the widest range of stories that we can tell about what's working, and those really shining examples, and actually what is really, really challenging. And I know today at this summit, there are leaders from across the sector, and the future of procurement really will be shaped by you all. If you're a commissioner, think about how procurement processes can enable collaboration rather than constrain it. If you're in the private sector, think about how partnerships with charities can create deeper, more meaningful community impact. And if you're in the VCSE sector, continue to bring your expertise, your evidence and your leadership into these conversations. Because procurement reform cannot be delivered by regulation alone. It really requires leadership across the whole system.